has been started.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's time. We are going to call this meeting for the CalSavers Retirement Savings Board to order. Mr. Van Voorhis, please provide instructions for making public comments.
Welcome to all attendees. Whether you are joining us online or via the phone, you are currently in listen-only mode. If at any time you are disconnected from the board meeting and wish to rejoin, please reconnect via the web link or redial the phone and enter the same participant code. During public comment periods, if you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand by using the icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you are joining via phone, dial *9. First, we will hear from any of those in the room who wish to speak. Then we will hear from attendees joining us via phone or the web link in the order that they raise their hand to join the queue to speak. For those joining remotely, you will see or hear a message when it is your turn to speak. Once you are done speaking, you will be put back in listen-only mode.
Thank you. Mr. Van Voorhis, please call the roll.
For Treasurer Fiona Moss.
Present.
For Controller Cohen.
Good afternoon. Present.
For Director of Finance, Joe Steffenshaw.
Gail Miller for Director of Finance.
Ms. Castellan.
Present.
Ms. Hooper.
Present.
And I believe Mr. Lay is absent. Is that correct? Mr. Lowe. Here. And Mr. Pro is also absent. Is that correct? Correct. And Mr. Sokol. Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum. To keep order during the meeting, please direct all questions and comments through the chair. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone of the new procedure that we have adopted. We're now hearing public comments immediately after presentations, followed by board comments, then motions. This will allow the board to consider and act on items informed by any public comments. Our first item is that we have an approval of the minutes for the May 22nd, 2023 board meeting. If there are any members of the public here in the room who wish to speak, please approach to provide your comments.
Seeing none in the room.
Thank you. If any attendee participating via Zoom would like to make a comment, please do raise your hand, or if you are on the phone, dial *9. Mr. Van Voorhis, would anyone like to make a public comment?
None.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
I actually do have one comment, and not in regard to the minutes, but while I welcome our new executive director with warm and open arms, I would be remiss if I did not state that I feel like we failed in our recognition of his predecessor. And I think we had ample opportunity there, and I hope and trust that that has been notably embraced going forward. And with that, cheers absolutely to the new executive director. I'm very excited about the future and have nothing but the utmost respect for a new chapter, let's just call this. But I would be doing a disservice if I didn't make that comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Van Voorhis, please call the roll.
Ms. Castellan.
Present.
Ms. Hooper.
Aye.
Mr. Lay is absent. Mr. Lowe. Aye. Miller.
Aye.
I have that incorrect on my sheet, sorry. Mr. Pro is absent. Mr. Sokol.
Approve.
The Controller.
Aye.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Chair. Yeah. I'm so sorry. May I just echo what Ms. Cooper said about Ms. Zelensky? Just huge gratitude for the service to the state, starting the program, and for allowing us to really grow and thrive in something that was brand new when we started this. Still needs, obviously, a lot of love and support, and very excited for our new executive director and chapter of the board, but also want to add Mr. Linsky and also Mr. Lawler, who was,
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
got through this first phase. So congratulations to both of them, and thank you for their service.
Mhm.
Thank you for the notes for the original team. With that, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. The next item of business is the Executive Director's report from Mr. Takar. Please present the item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone. Pleasure to be here. The first item on the Executive Director's report is a staffing update. There's a new Executive Director. So just, if you'll allow me just a moment of privilege, just want to say that I'm thrilled to be part of the organization. I'm a huge supporter and have been since inception, just watching from a distance, a few blocks away from CalPERS. Just very excited and an enthusiastic supporter of the work that's been done thus far. I think it is incredible, and I'm just really delighted to be a part of this and to help all of us together as a group, in addition to our strategic partners and stakeholders, bring this to fruition and take this from the startup build ultimately to sustainability as a permanent fixture of the California financial landscape. So thank you for this opportunity. I would like to just take a moment also to recognize the primary CalSavers team members that I've been interfacing with in my 40 or so days. That would be Jonathan Herrera, Jessica Strowing, and Angela Devane, as well as Connor, who's been running the day-to-day operations for us related to the board logistics. They've just been so embracing of my new tenure. All of them work for Katie, and we're obviously very loyal to her, but they've made it a very smooth transition for me. I just want to thank you all for that. Appreciate that. What I'd love to do now is just take you through some of the high-level numbers in the executive report. You have the numbers. I know that you're all very familiar with the primary two reports that show the efforts and progress of the program, which are items 2B and 2C, which are the participation and funding snapshot, as well as the enforcement report. So I'd like to just pull out a few of those, not go through them step by step for heaven's sakes, but just a few of the high-level numbers. And this will also sort of conform to what I, as a new set of eyes, see when I look at these numbers and what kind of pops out to me, and that's going to really inform the strategic priorities that we have going forward. So some of the top numbers to notice would be the 437,000 and change funded accounts, up 100% in less than 2 years, over 600 million in assets under management, tremendous growth there. Average monthly contributions into the account is $180 per month on average, and that represents 5.14% of those paychecks. So the default position for somebody newly enrolled in the program is 5%, so we're slightly over that. And as you know, the automatic deduction increases by 1% up to 8%. So definitely in the early stages here, people are mostly contributing very close to the minimum at this point, but to be expected with a relatively new program like this. As far as investment performance, our investment partners are here to provide you a detailed update on the investment landscape and what those returns are. But so far, very good in 2023, especially compared to the doldrums of the last couple of years. So returns somewhere in the 11.5% range for the primary target date funds, which represent just the by far vast majority of the funds to the tune of something like 97%. So most of our folks are reaping the positive gains, primarily driven by the stock market. Bonds, nothing whatsoever, but hopefully that balances out a little bit going forward. So that's the saver picture. Moving to the employer side of the equation, which, as you know, is the focus for the enforcement mandate, requiring them to take action if they're eligible. Of the 229,000 and change of employers that are in the CalSavers pool or have been, these are employers that didn't clearly already have an employer-sponsored plan in place. These were folks that needed to take action one way or another. Either they needed to say, we're getting a different type of employer plan, or we already had one, or we're going out of business, or in some case, they are exempted. Of that 229,000, about 112,000 have been exempted out of the process. And I'll just say that while that doesn't necessarily help CalSavers' bottom line, it's still a net victory for California and for the folks that were behind the genesis of this legislation that implemented the program, which is to to say, if you have a job in California, you need to have access to a retirement program through that job, because we just know that it is levels of magnitude more effective than just telling people, hey, go save for yourself. We just know that that doesn't work as a matter of public policy. So 112,000 people off the, have been exempted for the process, leaving 117,000 and change that needed to then go through the CalSavers adoption progress. Of those 117,000, though, only 42,000 to date have actually taken the third of this three-step process, the third step being actually get your employees uploaded and actual payroll deductions coming out of their paychecks. That is the only number that really matters in that three-step process, because simply registering your employer account on CalSavers didn't actually save any money. Nothing actually happened to ensure retirement security for those workers until the money starts getting deposited into the IRAs. And so that's going to be a big area of focus for us, is to drive up that number. It's really only 35% of the folks that have taken step one have gone to step three. Like, that's too low, so that'll be a focus. Pivoting now to the compliance piece, in terms of bringing employers into compliance. I've really seen this as a three-step process as well. A number of three steps going on here. The first step being the marketing of the program. This is about education. This is about outreach. This is the, hey, there's a new set of laws in place. We need you to come into compliance with this, and here's why it's so important. So that's the work that Katie Selensky and team have been spearheading for years. This has gone through wave one, wave two, and then we also have what you're seeing on that document there. You see, the results of the ongoing waves as well, which are denoted as wave 2022. We're in the midst of wave 2023 right now. So there's several different waves happening concurrently and overlapping. Of the, over 200 and that same number, sort of 230,000 or so employers, 75% of them have taken some kind of action. So that's good. Like, the marketing is working. The marketing is galvanizing people to take action, but again, it's not so far pushing an adequate number of them into full compliance, which again, I just going to harp on this. Nothing occurs until they're in full compliance, nothing at all, really. And so that's where they enter into stage two, which is enforcement. So that's what you're seeing on this document, attachment 2C here, is the progress that we're making to move people from just registration into full compliance. So right now we're in the midst of sending out due process letters. That is the sequence of 90 days, then 60 days, then 30-day letters that inform people that, listen, you have already passed the deadline, there's already a fee assessed, you must take action to come into compliance. Reach out to us, we'll help you get there. No money's being collected yet, it's not a bill at this point, but action needs to be taken, or else you will enter into the third phase, which is penalty collection. So right now, we're kind of in between, actually, we've started the process. Team can correct me if I'm wrong, but we were scheduled to start the process Friday and today of literally sending out those 30-day letters. So the next 30 days and the 45 days after that will be extremely informational to us. We will see what the result is, and then that will sort of guide what we work on from there.
Yeah.
The next stage is collection notices from Franchise Tax Board, though, and it's that is what we're approaching here. I know it's not the direct goal of this program to have revenue generation from penalties be part of this, so the team will continue to explore ways to get employers into compliance, because really we want them having saving money, not sending us penalties and then hoping that we just go away.
Through the chair, a quick question, and this perhaps is for a census, are there any common themes behind that gap? Getting the number, like if somebody started and didn't finish, are there any common themes that are popping out that we're recognizing and building something around?
Yeah, happy to have, Census will be joining us for their program review just right after this, so we can delay that. But my initial read is that there are a number of friction points with the ease of being able to run payroll deductions through your payroll, integration company. issues related to confusion on like what qualifies as an employee sometimes. But I think there is just a little bit of recalcitrance as well to comply with the government telling you to do something. And another piece would be that my fourth and final piece is that we're talking right now, like this wave 3 is employers with between 5 and 50 employees. And if you think maybe that's a pretty huge range. If you were running a business having 5 employees versus 50, I mean, I think that there's a sizable difference there in terms of the likelihood that you have a CFO, the likelihood that you have a full-time HR person who is plugged into all this. Big difference if you have 5 versus 50. So I think that it's just continuing to educate those folks on what we're asking them to do and then getting them into the habit of doing it and just trying to make that as easy as possible. So that's going to be one of my big strategic priorities, is to work to reduce anything that's getting in the way of making this as easy as possible. Like, this is not, we don't want this to be onerous. It should just be, listen, part of what you do as an employer in California is you provide jobs and you provide a workplace retirement option for your employees. Like, and let's just make it part of the paperwork, part of the process of doing business. But let's make it easy.
Thank you.
So that was my review of the primary numbers. I'd like to close out by just quickly sketching out some early days ideas about where we could focus attention, where we can put our efforts to hopefully move the needle. The first one I've already called out, so I'll keep this brief, driving up that percentage of employers that are stuck somewhere before step 3. Driving up the percentage of employers that have taken some action and then life happened, they forgot about it, they were confused, it's not easy, payroll integration isn't slick. Let's help to fix that. Number 2 would be to mobilize our stakeholder networks and strategic partners to get the word out through any and all means. So Jonathan Herrera, our Director of Strategic Stakeholder Outreach, has been all over this for years. Recently, we, just in the last couple of weeks, we had a statewide stakeholder meeting where we thought to kind of recatalyze this effort. We had a lot of folks that were very involved in like the lobbying and the support of the bills to get us there, but it's a whole different thing to then say, there's no more legislation right now for this. What we need is connection to business owners. We need connections to networks. We need a platform. We need to be on every newsletter. We need to get the news out to the employers that this needs to happen. Like, there's no more fun lobbying in the Capitol. This is like boots on the ground. The next piece that I see, I mentioned briefly already, reduce those friction points, so I won't belabor that. Working through this final piece of Wave 3 and then the transition to the franchise tax board penalties, I think that there's a very, very high likelihood that there will be scenarios wherein employers are paying the penalty and then seek to have that waived if they come into compliance after that or at some point there. So I would propose to the board that staff bring back to you in November some draft language on a policy that firms that process up, and when and if we would consider refunding that. I don't want us to run afoul of, in one scenario we did one thing, in another scenario we did something else. Someone forces us to reconcile those two things, and there's a level of exposure that there's no need for the program at this point to have. So I'd love to bring that back to you in November. And then preparation for Wave 4, which is going to be the smallest of employers, the 1 through 4. I mean, if the 5 to 50 guys don't have a CFO, then these folks don't. So how can we get in contact with them? How can we help them to understand what's required and why and what we need them to do? That will be the big work. Fortunately, we have some time on that one, but through the end of 25, that will be here before we know it. So a lot of work to be done there. So just some early thoughts. Again, I've only been here 41 days, so I'm not looking to tip over the apple cart. The direction is in the right direction already. I just want to help guide us and be of service to the board as you consider the ecosystem, and together we make the right decisions for California workers.
Through the chair. David, if I can take you all the way back to the first chart of numbers right behind 2B, right, where you just give us our participation funding numbers.
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand something. It's saying that of the people who could participate, 36% are opting out. So that means we say to the employer, we want your folks, and 36% of them say, I prefer to stay out of it. Go ahead, am I misreading that?
So what that it's like between 35 and 36, what that represents is, it's 35% of folks that have registered have actually started doing the payroll deductions. They are not opting out, 35% have actually completed the process. It's closer to 45% of folks from the total universe of eligible employers. That's that 112 number at the bottom of the exempt.
Well,
The exempt number, that's the people that are opted out of the whole CalSavers program.
well, help me here, because when I look at the right-hand chart, it says participant account status. It says effective opt-out rate,
Oh, okay, you're on that one,
right?
okay.
That, right there. You see that 36% there?
Yes,
Okay, so if I understand correctly, 36% of the people who could be participants
okay,
are saying, I don't want to be a participant,
okay, yes.
right?
Apologies, I thought you were talking about employers.
No.
This is about actual individuals.
Let me introduce this way. Let me back up, David. I know that for the next foreseeable future, your primary goal and focus has to be getting employers in. Understood. And that has to be the whole focus. I'm looking at the other side of the equation, the participants themselves.
Okay,
And what I see is 36% saying, hey, I don't want to play.
yes,
Okay.
Yes.
Then at the bottom of funding accounts, you've got, in other words, that second box on the right says withdrawal rate is 18%. So I gather that's after the participants start, they say, hang on, I'm taking my money out for whatever reason.
right.
So is it fair to say, am I right to add up 36 and 18, put them together and say, whoops, 54% of those who could participate are either taking their money out or choosing not to participate? Am I reading that right? And you can duck me and say, I'll get back to you. It's okay.
I think
And I'm not trying to
essentially
put you
you're
on the spot, David. I'm trying
There's
to.
like a percentage opt-out, then a percentage of the percentage that's in, so setting the complicated math aside, philosophically correct, like, that many people are saying, are either,
Half the folks.
they're not saying, yes,
Yeah, half the folks are kind of,
yes, they're not participating,
even though they could, their employers are in there
Yes.
saying, I'm out.
right,
Okay, so I'm gonna drop a footnote for you, okay? From one guy's point of view, insofar as our duty is to participants and beneficiaries, once we get employers participating, and I understand that's a long ways down the road, I think we've got to do something directed towards getting more of the potential participants to actually get into the program. Because the reason I say that, Dave, when we originally started this thing, way back in the beginning, we got all these projections, you know, from various people who are trying to tell us, here's what's going to happen to the program. We got piles of reports that all turned out to be inaccurate. So, but the expectation was 10, 20% or so would probably not participate. So something's happening out there in the real world that I hope at some point we can think about and talk about. What can we do, basically, to get more participation, not just of the employers, but ultimately of the workers who really need this? Yeah? Yeah. Nothing, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Through the chair, I would just echo everything that Bill just said, and I know that the economic environment is probably playing a large role in this, but educating people on things like emergency savings and dollar cost averaging and, you know, forgetting all the investment and the complicated stuff, the basics behind why this is so important. When we get there, and I know we're not there and we're focused on the employers right now, but that's what the Passion Project was around, was creating a brighter future for people down the line. So, thank you for that, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Executive Director Chakart, did you have any other comments for your presentation?
no further comments on the exec director report.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have one comment about Bill's point too, which I think is well taken. We, when somebody does withdraw, is there any process where we have information gathering to find out why they withdraw from the program, or, you know, or when somebody pulls their money out, is there any follow-up, even just on a, you know, a smaller basis, just to sort of get a sampling of why people are pulling their money out? Because I don't know what a good number is. You know, I'm sure that there were some projections when the program started, but they were based on like zero experience. So I don't know if, you know, if 36% is a good number or a bad number. And I also don't know, how we go about addressing it until we kind of find out why people are withdrawing and whether it's a high number or a low number, and what drives people out, so the more information we can gather about that might guide us in how we respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I don't know right now what the process is when they withdraw, but I will look into that, and I think it's a great idea.
I think a census can probably answer that for you.
So we do have another question from Controller, of course, and possibly others, but before, and she has graciously agreed to take public comment or questions first, if we don't mind. So if there's any questions or comments from the public, whether it be on the phone or on Zoom, please do raise your hand or of course press *9.
Seeing none?
All right, great. Hi, it's nice to see you. Both of us kind of new in a new role. So in the many hats that I wear as state controller, one of which is chairing the Franchise Tax Board. And in your report, you talked a little bit about partnering and doing some work with the Franchise Tax Board. And I wanted to know what that impact would be on the workforce, what the workload was going to be. Might be a little bit of a difficult conversation for you to have. I don't know if there's a staff member that supports you that would be able to have that answer, but I just wanted to know, how do we anticipate what that workload will be, the new workload? This is specific to the fees that you talked about in your presentation.
Well, the good news is that the interagency agreement is already in place, and actually the workload thus far and projected forward is actually less than the original contract was envisioning. So we are at somewhere around $4 million over a number of years. It's come in substantially less than that. And so I'm also optimistic that through our efforts, we actually don't want the Franchise Tax Board to do too much work in actually collecting money. What we want to do is really focus on having clean and very fast data exchange, so that as soon as possible, as soon as we at CalSavers know that an employer is coming to compliance, we want Franchise Tax Board to know that, and vice versa. If an employer submits a penalty payment to them, we want that information to come over as soon as possible to us as well. So I think that's going to be the focus to start. Mr. Oppenheim in your office has already offered to connect me with another one of your deputies, and so I'm optimistic that we can work through this with FTB.
So do you have any idea or an estimate about the cost to administer the penalty notice program?
I don't know exactly what the cost of that specific piece is.
Okay. When you get it, just get back to Mr. Oppenheim. And then I guess another question is that cost going to be reimbursed to FDB through the penalties that are going to be imposed on the employees?
They're not
cost recovery.
Pardon my interruption.
That's okay.
They are not specifically based on the amount of penalties, explicitly not so. It is part of our administrative budget. It's part of our cost of doing business was built on this concept that Franchise Tax Board would do somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million worth of work per year. And so that is built into our projections as just one of the strategic partners that we have, like Ascensus, like Makita, like the others. It's just a carefully considered piece of the plan, because there was really no other way, and it was built in legislatively to have FTB.
And colleagues also weigh in. Let me know if you guys know the answer to the question, please. Thank you. The final question is, what authority does either CalSavers have or does the FTB have when it comes to either forgiving or negotiating with the penalties that are assessed on an employer? Is there leeway, is there flexibility for a negotiation?
I think that's where the policy you mentioned came into play, right?
Right. So we want to put more guidelines around this. My understanding is that actually the Franchise Tax Board, if they get a check, they're going to cash it. That's the function. Then when the money is sent over to CalSavers, I believe that we have essentially authority to make decisions around that. I need to do some more research into that, and that's where we need to get some perhaps regulatory clarity on what steps we're going to follow. But the CalSavers Retirement Savings Board has a lot of authority. I don't want to say the word plenary yet, because that will give me, but it's a lot. I mean, it's big in terms of discretion on how to administer the fund, which includes any penalties that are taken in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Thank you.
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
All right, for our next item, item number 3, we're moving on to the program administrator's report from Mr. Troy Montague. He is the program administrator for Ascensus. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excited to be here and also, very grateful and appreciative of the first time I've ever presented at a, state partner board meeting to hear my last name pronounced correctly. So,
Here to serve.
either taken French at some point or not a reader. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today, back with a lot of you in person for the first time in a few meetings, and of course, welcoming so many new faces to the fold, Madam Chair, Mr. Takert, other new ones, in the room here. Just for the benefit of the public and the members, a reminder, this is item 3, attachment 3A. Some really probing and insightful questions, today during the session that I'm happy to try to supplement with as much information as possible, but I think there's, a lot of exciting direction, certainly, that, David, as he acclimates to the role, and the staff that has been here, predating him, can focus on in the years ahead. Really quickly, I think just as kind of a point of, industry personal privilege, I think we'd be remiss, not to, share the exciting fact that the state-facilitated retirement industry, as of the last few weeks, has collectively hit $1 billion in assets under management. So while there are admittedly challenges ahead of us in terms of lifting employer participation and really starting to speak to the employees and savers, it's an exciting time to take stock of what's been accomplished so far, on an outsized basis by this program. This program alone is 60% of that total, roughly. And together with the other partner that we work with in the Illinois Secure Choice Program, Ascensus is really proud to administer about 73% of those assets at this time, and a sizable majority of the employers, who have began offering retirement savings to their employees for the first time via these programs.
If I could.
Yeah.
Could I jump in and while you're right there, what other states are actually collecting money as opposed to just having a program that provides a marketplace besides us in Illinois at this point?
I think we're up to, I would have to tick off individually. So California, Illinois, Oregon, Connecticut, Maryland, Colorado, Virginia,
yeah.
and some others are, preparing to launch, in the near future as well. So I believe we're actually up to 7. Oh, and I guess, Massachusetts is a different product. It's a MEP. So, it's considered part of that $1 billion, but it's fundamentally different than what we're doing here with the auto IRA programs. Yeah. There's actually, I think, 19 now that are in some, phase of the implementation pipeline. Some have just passed legislation this year and will be making, many of the decisions that you and Ms. Hooper and others were making, years ago about, what direction to head in. So I do want to follow up before I get into some of the prepared presentation today, some of the things I heard earlier. On the employee/saver side, there was the question about the opt-out rates. That's something that's really tricky, I think, for us to figure out how to address because, we market the program on there being so little that the employer has to do directly. They're supposed to register and upload a roster and then remit payroll contributions for those that pass the customer identification process, that decide to stay into the program. They're really not supposed to or frankly allowed to really advocate for the program one way or the other in terms of encouraging people not to opt out. Unfortunately, we do have some anecdotal evidence from the past few years, particularly in the earlier, larger waves. When we get a manila envelope with 100 opt-out forms in it, probably not 100 employees that decided to opt out individually, brought them in at the same time, gave them to their employer, asked their employer to mail them in. There's some degree, I wouldn't say it's widespread, but we know a little bit that there's probably, some coercion or encouragement happening out there. And then I think it was really astute, obviously, to be mindful of the fact that there are macroeconomic factors here that really are disproportionately impacting the population that tends to be served by programs like this. In a lot of ways, they've had kind of rough hands dealt over the last few years, are dealing with some of the things we hear about every day on a much more granular level than many of us who've had access to retirement savings for decades are.
Through the chair, may I ask a question? And this is future state because obviously it would mean money being thrown at a system, and I understand that all too well. Perhaps of consideration for that future state is drop-down boxes. When someone does decide to opt out, drop-down boxes, when someone does decide to take their money out, it gives reasons why.
So we do actually have those, by the way, and so
Okay.
I think I'll take it as a takeaway here to make sure that the staff
Great.
is armed with the information.
Great.
Buckets necessary.
Yes, thank you
Can all
very
have a
much.
better picture. Specifically, I know a while back, prior to the transition and new staffing and outgoing staff and whatnot, we looked a little bit into the current look of the withdrawal reasons. A majority of people just select the other reason. We're not giving them, an open field for feedback, tell us about your life situation, why are you doing this right now?
Right.
But we can get kind of a periodic look at why people are coming in and out of the program.
I think that would be helpful.
I think another factor to keep in mind too is, in both constituencies we deal with, employers and employees/savers, they have a lot of demands on their time. A lot of the folks that become savers in the program, for whatever reason, may not take note of the email that we issue to them, the printed letter that we issue to them, and so they get a paycheck or two paycheck or three paychecks in, and they start to wonder, what's this $10, $20, $50 that's coming out of my paycheck per pay period? And then that kind of boosts that opt-out rate a little bit, because suddenly their paycheck's just a little bit smaller, and they don't always understand exactly why. And so because we've all collectively been primarily focused on employer engagement, there's a lot of takeaways for us all to work together on in the years ahead.
And perhaps we can refine those drop-downs.
Yeah, of course. Then I know also that, it's kind of been a long-standing priority or commitment to revisit what employee engagement and what saver engagement looks like. In a little bit, in the marketing update here, we've talked at the last couple meetings about how we're transitioning our communications capabilities to the Salesforce Marketing Cloud platform. That's primarily on day one and first couple 100 days going to impact the way we engage employers, just make the nuts and bolts behind the scene work a little bit differently. But I think it's going to make us, the Ascensus staff that, represents you all with the end users on a day-to-day basis, much more nimble in the way we can reach out to savers. And I think we'll collectively come to an understanding about what is the core saver population that we want to target and cultivate on an ongoing basis, or how do we nudge them in a direction where maybe we can modify the messaging a little bit to knock that opt-out rate down by a couple percentage points, or, use some behavioral science to get people at the point of withdrawal and say, well, here's the implications of doing that. So if you can afford to keep this relatively small amount or percentage going in, you're going to be this much better off, in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, and that's where I go back to the system, sort of showing what that impact actually is when they do make that decision. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
We talked a little bit, David and the staff have talked a lot about the enforcement activity, or what I would call at this point, I guess, compliance activity, because I want to distinguish the fact that they're not yet the majority of these employers in the actual FTB enforcement process. The question on, what are kind of the pain points, or what are keeping employers from getting to point A of making the decision to register or exempt, or go in a direction that would let them exempt by offering another qualified plan versus getting all the way to the point of payroll remittance. And there are a couple things that I don't want to say are beyond our control, but aren't directly impacted by their experience. I think the thing to remember about Wave 3 in particular is that we were building up to Wave 3 for years and years and years. And while the majority of Wave 3 employer activity happened in June 2022, we were reaching out to this population back in 2020 to some degree. And so I think a lot of employers, if you look at the registration numbers from the last few months since the due process notices started going out, they're really working on moving what we call Type 2 and Type 3 compliance. Since June 15th, which was roughly when those the due process notices sent via state OSP went out, employers in the program that have added employee rosters is up by over 5,000 after being relatively flat for the first few months of the year as we were kind of in between waves. And employers that have remitted payroll contributions for the first time is up by over 2,400. However, registrations are pretty flat, in fact, are actually down a little bit. I think in many cases, because employers that registered back in 2020 or 2021, just to sort of check the box of the first step on the path to compliance, you know, in the year since, between that, and the actual waive deadline last year and now the onset of due process enforcement activity, everybody else in the industry, whether you want to call them a competitor or a peer or a partner or whatnot, was marketing off of this state mandate too. And it's now well covered and I think pretty well acknowledged that the thinking that programs like these were gonna, kill the retirement industry were way off base. It's been a lift for every piece of the retirement industry. And, I know Katie during her tenure and a lot of her peers around the country, the boards and the staff have always been really clear that they're kind of product agnostic. Whatever creates the lift and accomplishes the end goal of enhancing retirement security, that's great. We're not the solution. We're a part of the patchwork of solutions. And so looking at that registration activity over the last few months suggests to me that those employers registered, then kind of stopped in the process, and then maybe went and formed a 401k or joined a PEP. More power to them. For the ones that are actually staying with us, payroll provider integrations is certainly something that we want to work on and enhance. Unfortunately, that is where a little bit of that competitive instinct or nature comes in. There are many that we can go and say, we have this many thousands of employers that have indicated an affiliation with you, so don't you want to fully integrate with us so that you can make that experience easier for them? And they still, in some cases, view us as a competitor, would rather have them, offering, for instance, their proprietary 401k versus, even if they can make a little money off of it by charging them to help facilitate CalSavers, they would rather them come to their product. I think we can also make improvements at the point where employers offer what payroll provider they're affiliated with, making it really clear at that point with resources that we offer that just because you say you work with a payroll provider doesn't mean A or B or C payroll provider, doesn't mean that the minute you get through registration, they're just doing everything for you. There's a perception from some employers that if they put in this payroll provider that we don't have an integration with, that they're just going to take care of everything, and that's not always the case. Then for the ones that do work with payroll providers, we have integrations with, making sure they know that that's at their disposal.
Question, Mr. Chair. Would you be good enough to name names? Which ones are you integrated with and which have you not been able to that are large?
I think the staff policy in the past has been, I'd probably be more comfortable saying the ones we're integrated with for CalSavers there is a percentage of that gap between those two that, we're just not gonna get, for lack of a better term, for now. I think what I and we at Ascensus are really focused on is kind of recultivating employers. I think traditionally, we sort of thought of this as a linear journey where they're gonna register and add employees and facilitate payroll, and then they're gonna keep doing that. But we know that in a lot of cases, they add their roster one time, they start remitting payroll, they maybe don't go back and maintain it regularly, or, Linda from HR hypothetically leaves and doesn't document super well that this is what you need to do to continue facilitating CalSavers. So, we're really focused on building out some of those communicative capabilities, and the program staff here has highlighted those as opportunities that we can work on in the years ahead too. Yeah.
Thank you for your insight. Connor, I just wanted to make sure that the line is working so that the public can hear, of course, the board meeting, to make sure that everyone's engaged. Madam Chair, we have a Makita person on the line who said that they can now hear, if that's helpful. Appreciate that.
Cool.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Apologies for the technical problem.
No worries. Through the chair, just really quickly, when I'm in seeking, the journey that we've all been through over the last 4 years, I would imagine that there's probably also employers out there that started out with 50 employees and ended up with 10.
Yes.
Or employers that went out of business. I know that certainly hit the small business industry. And having a husband that works at a giant organization, they are working very hard at forcing attrition.
Yeah.
So I think that's all that the economy, I think, is playing a significant role in addition to the pandemic.
Of course. Now, obviously, the legislation last year and what we're now terming Wave 4 helped a lot with that. We captured a lot that fell below the mandate.
Yep.
I'll give you an example as you all, look at the monthly charts and look at our quarterly updates here. Wave 2023, for instance, with nearly 40,000 employers, is that big because there were a lot of Wave 3 employers who we previously exempted out via the annual EDD data files that now are back above 5 employees. So their deadline is this year. Others got put into Wave 4 because they went below mandate, stayed there, and so they have a little bit more time to comply. So there's a lot of movement happening back and forth. We're on a weekly basis, exempting out new employers that provide proof of evidence of their closure or merger or whatever it is to, Jonathan and the outreach team, and they work closely with our client services organization to make sure those exemptions are staying current.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll just cover a couple things in here because I know we've had a great discussion here, but I want to make sure I'm helping you all keep on schedule. There's a slide in this deck, the annual employer campaign strategy, where we kind of delineated, who's sort of the primary responsible party for each phase of the process, whether it's Ascensus or the CalSavers staff. And there's a couple footnotes that just notes that the CalSavers staff work is supplemented by a couple of different state agency partners here that play really critical roles in this process. I mentioned earlier EDD, with whom you're all really familiar, provides the raw data that Angela Duvain and her team then cull through and remit to a census that we can update our platform each year and make sure we're reaching out to the right employers. From then, we primarily issue all of the early outreach notices, the official invite at about the 100-day mark, the consistent outreach between that and the deadline, a series of kind of lighter in tone missed deadline notices that kind of look like everything employers have gotten to that point, before the due process notices that you receive the report on earlier kick in, and then the actual enforcement process. But because we've done this so many times now, we've kind of refined, I think, what works and when we really need to focus on things. Last 30 days are the most critical, and then building up from that, the 100 days or so before the deadline are really critical, and then we know that the pre-enforcement compliance notices are going to have a big lift, as are the enforcement notices. So jumping ahead briefly into client services, a look at the performance benchmarks over the last few months. Q2 was the first full quarter in which we were observing the new contractual service level agreements or administrative benchmarks from the contract amendment last year. Incredibly happy to report that, we met both of the core SLAs for the quarter, a 1 minute and 9 second average speed to answer compared to the 3-minute contractual SLA, and a 2.77% abandon rate compared to the new, 4% contractual SLA. If you kind of look at the year-over-year call volumes down at the bottom, no surprise, the call activity in Q2 was remarkably down from last year because we don't have the massive Wave 3 deadline to contend with. But if you compare May to June, call volume was up by almost 50%, and that's attributable to the first round of due process notices that went out to Wave 3 and Wave 2022. Our servicing org estimates that those, 60,000, I think was the rough neighborhood of notices that went out, had roughly a 25% response rate. Everything I talked about earlier, the early outreach, the 100-day notice, those emails, we're happy to get like between a 1 to 3% response rate. So these pre-enforcement notices or due process notices, as we call them here, are having a remarkable lift, and we anticipate that the actual FTB penalty notices will be even more so. A couple slides ahead, even as we've changed the committed service agreements, did provide a look there at kind of what the new SLAs, the blue bars on the left chart. So the blue bars represent the percentage of calls answered in 3 minutes or less, but we're still kind of showing you how many calls are still being answered in 30 seconds or less, which was the old SLA, 85% of calls answered in 30 seconds, and showing that there's really been no measurable, most importantly, negative impact on participant satisfaction. Our kind of hypothesis that we could staff to a level where we can take a little bit longer to answer the phone, and make the program more sustainable for the long run, but
Please don't do that.
but generally that employers and employees are still going to be very happy with their experience, is being proven out in practice. And then last but not least, reviewing kind of the field team activities, the employer and community engagement. We work really closely with Jonathan Herrera and his growing outreach team. And they've really kind of been focused on that compliance-related outreach, getting employers who stopped at some point in the process to re-engage and get all the way to what we consider true full compliance of remitting payroll deductions. Again, they're playing a smaller role in the webinar program now that's primarily managed by the outreach team internally here. They still do support some, but mostly focused on employer meetings out in the field, again, driving actual compliance with the program mandate. With that, I'm happy to answer any other questions or comments, I guess, from the order of public and the board as necessitated.
Are there any questions from the public on the phone line or on Zoom?
Seeing none at this time.
Thank you, Sonia. Any additional questions from the board for Mr. Monsignor?
Just one, Madam Chair. So I think that part of what we've always struggled with is, as we're educating people about how to join, it's the benefit of saving versus, all the other things that we have to consider with our paychecks, including, things like feeding our family. So I think if we can really continue to refine that, and I know that we get marketing updates, it certainly doesn't have to be today, but I just think we need our marketing materials to be very kind of 2023, which includes benefits of saving, but so much of this was really a question of behavioral economics, how we get people to change their behavior and want to save. So how we continue to adapt the way we're talking to folks, I think, is increasingly important. So when you come back, certainly next quarter, you don't have to answer this now, but just how we're evolving in terms of the way we're talking to people, I really do think matters, is one. And then two, this idea of whether or not folks are being pressured not to enroll, we just, I think, want to be careful when we say things like that, because that's, A, it's kind of a big accusation, and B, if it's really happening, we'd want to investigate it. So let's just make sure we're really solid on statements like that, I think, before we say them, because if, in fact, that's the case, you probably want to investigate that employer at some point, because nobody should be coerced, right, no matter what it is, like, whether it's signing up for a potluck or CalSavers or something bigger. Like,
Of course,
So I just want to make sure we're super clear on that.
of course.
Yeah, through the chair. Behavioral finance is everything. It's absolutely everything. So, if you are looking for ideas, I have a lot. So you can definitely feel free to reach out to me as far as books, as far as TED Talks, as far as one-page materials. To pull on the emotions is much more valuable than the logic, because the heart is what makes the decision, not the head.
We always welcome that feedback. We
Yeah.
know that this board here has, obviously decades of collective expertise in the industry, and,
Yeah.
we're really proud of our user experience team too, that contributes into that. So please, whatever you want to share
Absolutely.
directly or via David and the staff.
Yeah, I can share it through David for sure. And Gail, thank you for bringing that up, because it's absolutely everything. That's what changes the dial.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
for your effort. Moving to the next item of business, number 4, we have a report for our second quarter investment performance. Welcome, Ms. McMillan and Paolo Miller.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. So, thus far today, the conversation is focused on the program, its administration, getting employers into the program, getting participants into the program and to stay in the program. Paola and I are going to just talk a little bit more about, once the participants are in the program, what has their experience looked like this year, and specifically in the second quarter. So if it works for the board, what I'd like to do is spend just a couple of moments setting the backdrop for the second quarter in the investment markets, and then Paola will speak to the specific experience of your participants within the program options that you have. So if you don't mind going to page 14 of 60, this is just a quick snapshot of the marketplace in the second quarter. And I think that this board is all quite familiar with where we were. One, it's been a couple of months since the end of June. And two, it's been a really interesting year in the investment markets. Many of you sit on other boards. When I think about how the markets influence savers in a program like this, it's a little bit different than the way I think of how it influences pension board decision-making. So I wanted to just highlight that from our perspective, you have a couple of things that are probably weighing heavily on individuals' minds, right? Inflation is all over the news. People are, whether headline inflation has come down substantially, but its impact on the average saver is probably not nearly as comforting, right? People are still paying a lot more for food and items at the store. So these, to me, the inflation numbers that are out there and what happens to the economy over the next, say, 3 to 12 months is really going to weigh on people's decision-making when they look at their savings and their investments. So one of the things that we watch is whether where we sit today from an inflation standpoint, from an economic growth standpoint, is going to put us into a recession. That will obviously weigh on savers even more. The marketplace has been talking about the potential of a recession for so long that I can't even calculate now, but it is a very widely anticipated, maybe almost recession that we wait for. So if you talk to Goldman, they tell you at this point the probability of a recession is below 20%. If you look at treasuries, they tell you the probability is still more like 60 to 70%. It is really difficult to know. It's also really difficult to know when we would see that, right? So at what point, it's always backwards looking that we have enough data points to be able to say that we're there. From my perspective, what we know we have is a lot of volatility, and we've seen that just in the last 6 months, right? In terms of the markets, obviously equity markets, when we look at the second quarter on its face, really positive returns. Your savers are going to be feeling good about the returns they've gotten from their target date funds, if they're invested in the equity index fund. In the fixed income marketplace, because rates have been rising, that's been a bit more of a challenging environment for savers. But when we look, I just remembered back to our conversation a couple of years ago about the money market fund, which ultimately was deemed an impractical default for participants, even for a short time period, because yields were so low that people were effectively going to lose money on the safest investment in the plan. Today, short-term rates are pushing 5% or over 5% in some cases, so that's not an issue anymore, but the volatility in the bond market is really high. And I think I think it's difficult for people who have been in the investment industry for 2 or 3 decades to understand. I think it's really difficult if you don't spend all of your time watching the bond market to understand how these types of investments could change so dramatically in such a short period of time. So all of that to say that I think on its face, participants are likely having a pretty good year so far. The third quarter, as we sit actually today, has looked not quite as rosy, but when Paula walks through the performance of plan options in the second quarter and over the last year, I think people are going to be broadly pleased. I still watch a lot of the geopolitical issues facing the economic environment, even outside of rates, right? We still have Russia, Ukraine, ongoing political tensions with China. There's a lot out there that could, any one of those things kind of bubbling to the surface can create more volatility in the markets. Not to mention we have an upcoming presidential election, which is a year and a half or so away, but will take up a lot of the market's time and energy trying to anticipate what might happen. So all of these things kind of create a lot of potential for things to disrupt people's saving habits and people's investment outcomes. If we look just briefly at page 15, all I wanted to do was show graphically here what the markets looked like. On the left, we show 2022. On the right-hand side, we're showing year-to-date 2023. It's no longer, it used to look kind of like a nice puzzle where everything was matched, but in reverse. Now, year-to-date 2023 is actually so positive that it outstrips some of those numbers in 2022. Although, as we all know, if you lose 20% in the stock market, and then you gain 20% in the stock market, you're gaining that on a lower base, and so you have not made up for what you lost. And so it's notable still to me that for a lot of folks, depending on when they're contributing to a plan like this, they're still underwater for a lot of those investments that they contributed money towards last year. So, but broadly speaking, at the top of that page, there's all sorts of I realize how many acronyms exist in the investment markets every time I look at a table or chart like this. But the S&P 500, the most commonly referred to U.S. stock market, up almost 17% year to date now, and a lot of that coming from positive gains in the second quarter. International stocks were up somewhat less, although still in very positive territory. If you look at the EFA, that's kind of broad developed markets outside of the U.S., up about 12%, 11.7 here. And then as you move your way down the page, you start to get into other types of assets. You see credit-oriented securities like the high-yield bond index. These aren't individual options that your savers are having to select among, but you do see that the Bloomberg aggregate, that's core bonds, participants have access there. And then if you go to the very bottom, one part that's not a direct component of your investment lineup are commodities. And you can see how volatile they are. In 2022, the only positive performing asset class. In 2023, the most negative performing asset class, and energy is obviously a huge component of what the commodity are doing. So just wanted to, again, kind of provide that brief backdrop and then let Paula walk through some of the specific performance of the plan. But if there are any questions or comments about the markets, I'm happy to address those before turning it to Paula.
Through the chair, I think it's, and again, this is a deeper dive conversation, but there are already some industries in recession. And then you have the recession fears being none and the recession fears being something. At the organization that I work for, we do a 2-minute video where we talk about these things. And that might be something from a marketing perspective that we start to do for the employers to pass along to the savers so that they understand broadly in plain English what actually is going on. Just food for thought.
Yeah, as I mentioned, and I couldn't agree more, it is a really
crazy
to interpret, and for your average investor at any level, and particularly here, I think there's just a lot of information to digest to make decisions. So that's great feedback. Thank you. Okay, I'll turn it over to Paula.
Thanks, Mika. So I will be covering, and I'll try to keep it short and succinct, but I'll be covering, let's start with Tier 1, which are the target date funds. Maybe we could just jump to page 9. Thank you. So as Nika mentioned, the markets were up this quarter, and given the risk-on environment, certainly, equities, any kind of equity exposure benefited. The one way to look at this table as a reminder to everyone, going from left to right, you have the more conservative funds that are nearing retirement, and then all the way to the right-hand side, 2065 is the more aggressive, kind of higher allocations to equity. And in terms of the quarter, we saw a return range of 1.4% to 4.9% on the upper end. Going sort of down the table, you see the quarter 1, 3, and then since inception time horizon. Looking at that since inception, again, strong returns across the board, 5.2% the income fund and all the way to 13.4% 2065 funds. Note on that, we certainly pay attention to absolute performance, but in this case, the relative performance is really a key sort of way to compare and evaluate performance. And as you can see, most of these funds, or all of these funds, have tracked the index pretty closely and across all time horizons. Just a kind of a note and a reminder, when you look at the index, this is just a hypothetical portfolio investment holdings. What that means is it doesn't incur any kind of trading costs. You can't, you can't invest in it directly. And so typically the funds should track the representative index, but will lag a little bit when you take into account the investment manager fees, which is included in this table. In terms of what worked and what didn't, when you look at the target date funds, as a reminder, we've got pretty much 3 big building blocks here. We have equities to help grow your assets. We've got the inflation-sensitive assets that helps preserve purchasing power and capital, and then you have the fixed income portion, which really against any kind of equity drawdown. Equities was the big player this quarter, large cap in particular. I'm sure by now everyone has heard of the Magnificent Seven, and those really were driving the overall market. So if you were in large cap, you did well. Small cap also returned pretty strong for the quarter, 6.45%, and then international 2.5%. So in terms of the target date funds, those equities was the biggest driver. The inflation sensitive assets, that's real estate in this case, and TIPS, sort of mixed results. And then in the fixed income markets, again, just the anticipation of rising rates really creating a headwind for those returns. If we turn to the next page.
Can I just ask a question on the target date? So I do think just in terms of what we were saying earlier, like why you save, I mean, this is obviously hard to understand, but the long-term outlook, if we were to be a little bit more specific on this, could actually be like, wow, it's like those articles, like invest $1,000 today. And, so I do think, not this chart, because this chart is ugly. Pretty, but the red is ugly, but just our ability to really show people what the benefit is, I think something like this could be really helpful.
Yeah.
So maybe just a little bit of collaboration with a census on the value of the investment in the future. I think something like this.
Something to sort of like marry them together. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good point. Great. So Tier 1, within the Tier 2 mutual funds, we have 2. We have the State Street Ag Bond Index. Again, you see some negative returns for the quarter, down 80 basis points, and longer-term horizons also down. But again, relative to the benchmark, essentially you're buying the fixed income market, and it's tracking closely. The Tier 2, as we call it, it's a combination of two separate funds bolted into one, and so those are the individual returns. State Street 500 Index returning 8.7% for the quarter, again, strong quarter, and then the State Street Global X 2.5% return, and then closely tracking the respective benchmarks.
And one thing just to note on the Global ex-US, often in international security pricing, you tend to see a little bigger deviation between returns and the benchmark in that space, just because pricing securities in those markets, there can be little differences from a currency perspective. So just wanted to note that this still falls within what we'd consider reasonable expectations.
And over time, those should really even out, kind of thing. Next page. Great. So we have, Tier 3 represent the active funds that we hold for the CalSavers program. As Mika mentioned, certainly we're starting to get healthy returns on the money market fund, which was not the case over, a year and a half ago. And then the Calvert U.S. Large Cap Core, this is a new fund that was recently included into the program, so we only have short performance history, 8.7% returning for the quarter, so strong in terms of an absolute result. The underweight to energy in this case, just given their ESG responsible investing criteria, most of the energy companies do not meet the criteria for inclusion, and that certainly helped the portfolio in this case, as well as an overweight to tech, again, losing returns. So all in all, a good start to just as what is one quarter. And that concludes my comments for performance, excuse me.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you. I have a question. So, Mika, when you were making your presentation, you kind of reported out that there's a lot of speculation about the market slowing down. I think everyone agrees that it's going to be slowing down. I wanted to know what your take is going to be on how that's going to impact our funds' returns.
Yeah, so great question, and I wish that I knew specifically. What I will say is that generally speaking, a recession is going to be very challenging for equity assets. It tends to put pressure on people investing for growth over the long term, right? Companies tend to then be reporting lower earnings, which sort of influences stock prices. So I would say that if I'm just thinking loosely about a recession, I'd be concerned that equities would potentially be challenged. Bonds tend to hold up better in that environment. This is a little unique because we've had rates rising. So I think the real question would be, do we see a recession and then the Fed decreasing rates? Or do we see a recession at the same time that the Fed hasn't quite gotten to that point? That's the piece of the equation that's really hard for me, or hopefully anyone, to know the answer to. If there's somebody out there who knows, I would love to hear. But I would say that, generally speaking, as rates rise, that depresses returns in the near term for bonds, but increases their yield. So if you're buying a bond today, you're certainly in a better position than you were 3 years ago buying the same duration bond. Let's say it's on the shorter end of the curve, because you're going to yield more if you hold it to maturity. The challenge is, as those bonds reach maturity, you need to reinvest. And so you can be faced with, as rates rise, needing to reinvest and kind of lose capital in some cases. As rates compress, though, now bond returns get more positive. So hard to say for sure. What I like about target date funds in your program or in other programs is that they do have a diversified pool of assets with some specific components that are designed to protect against different market environments. And so hopefully savers see the benefit of that. And I think something like 97% of all assets today are still in the target date fund. So the vast majority of your savers are in a diversified pool of assets. So hopefully through access to education, through the information they get from a census's website, they'll feel comfortable remaining invested. The worst case scenario, and what we saw a lot 15 years ago after the global financial crisis was, and this is obviously CalSavers wasn't around, but you did see individuals after a significant drawdown pulling capital out of the markets, just feeling discomfort with that drawdown risk. There's a lot of education out there now to try to help people feel confident, understanding that those tend to be short, sharp shocks, and then over time your assets can still grow. So that's certainly my hope, is that people have the last 3 years to look at and say, I've earned 5, 10, 13% a year over the last few years. It's worth keeping my assets in CalSavers.
So hearing you answer this question, it's just reminded me, I usually have a staff person that attends the meetings for me, but I realize I just don't know the investment strategy. So David, I'm going to look to you. Maybe someone can meet with me just to tell me overall, what the strategy is, where we're trying to go and how we're going to get there.
Certainly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Through the chair, just one minor comment is, and I know you guys know this better than anyone, this is the first time in 40 years that we saw bonds do what the market was doing. I mean, I was 12 the last time it happened. So I'm sure that had an impact on the savers watching their money. They're like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a buffer. So that goes back to Gail's point on behavioral finance and really leaning into, you know, the target date fund having an element of it. And you do sometimes see someone either pull their money out because they're freaked out, locking in their losses, or dialing into something more conservative because they think they're going to protect themselves, when really they're not.
Right. I mean, even with rates in money market funds at, you know, let's say they're at 4 or 5%, inflation, even though it's come down, you know, that eats away a lot of that money market return. And so on a net basis, it's still kind of hard to imagine that you want to keep your assets there over the long term, grow them, pay for retirement. So it's likely to be a challenged environment, though, if we do have kind of an extended recession.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any comments from the public, whether it be in the audience, on the phone, or via Zoom? Please raise your hand or press *9.
Seeing none at this time.
Thank you, Connor. Any additional questions from the board before we move to item 5?
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to item number 5, the Administrative Fund Audit Report for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. We will have a representative from Gilbert CPAs, who is joining us virtually, will now present the item.
Juan, can you hear me okay?
We're going to
Try
turn
again,
the
please.
volume over here.
Okay. Can you hear
Okay,
me now?
yes, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Aspen. I'm a senior manager at Gilbert CPAs. I'm here to share the results of the June 30th, 2022 audit for the CalSavers Administrative Fund. As you might notice, it's not especially timely data any longer since it's 2022. That being said, if there's information in the audit report that you looked over that you'd like me to cover, I'm happy to go into more details, but otherwise I'll probably keep it pretty high level just based on the information being over a year old at this point. Before I get started, I just wanted to note, I wanted to say thank you to Jessica Stroing over at CalSavers, to thank her for stepping in after everyone that we worked with leaving. So she was especially helpful and was really kind and helpful. And we were both a little bit nervous because the shareholder on the engagement also retired during the time from when it started to when we completed. So she and I just kind of were able to piece it together and move it along. But I just wanted to say thank you to Jessica for her help and support during the process. So that being said, just there was no significant adjustments or concerns. We evaluate and gain understanding of internal controls for the program, and we had no concerns. Just based on the timing of information that we rely on from the controller's office, we were waiting for the OPEB information to be finalized. So that's kind of why we were pushed out this far. It became available last month, and so we were able to finalize this this audit. So that being said, we had no concerns and it was a clean audit, and nothing significant to report from the side. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to go into more detail. Otherwise, good news from our standpoint.
Thank you. Any questions from the public?
Yeah.
Really quick, from the public on the phone or via Zoom, any questions?
None at this time.
Thank you.
No?
We'll move to
Okay.
questions from the board. We do have a question from the controller, please.
Hi, good afternoon. You said that we have a clean audit. That's really great. Congratulations to the entire staff that makes that possible. I was wondering if there were any issues of concern or areas that we should be watching or making a mental note, pay attention to?
Oh, sure. So from our standpoint, it's a relatively low risk fund. It's just the administrative piece. So it's kind of just, the management and oversight aspect of it. And the accounting's done by the treasurer's office. And so there's a lot of segregation of duties there. There's less risk because the treasurer's office is performing a lot of the accounting. And so just that being in place there it's a lower risk audit for us because there is such a segregation of duties there as far as separation from management and who's actually doing the accounting services for it. So as far as evaluating our controls, we had no concerns about any sort of high risk areas that we identified. So there was nothing that we found that needed to be brought to your attention. That being said, there is a level of, it's not timely just based on the information being delayed from the controller's office. And so that's the only thing that we run into really is by the time it's shared with the board, it's not really very useful information any longer. So I think that's our only concern when we're presenting this information is that, it's over a year old at this point. And typically with organizations, we like to be able to report it within, at least 6 months or less, because then it's useful data to be able to make decisions based off of. But that being said, there's so much that's dependent on other information for them to be able to provide this final information to you.
Wait, did I hear you correctly? You said that the controller's office gets you information not in a timely manner?
Well, it's the, so there's two pieces that we wait on, and this is for most of the funds that we audit. So there's the pension information that they're actually dependent on the control. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Time out, just yes or no? We're not getting the information to you timely? It's just a point of clarification.
Oh,
area
well, this is statewide. It's for the final, other post-employment benefits information, that final report that comes. So it's statewide. It's not just for CalSavers. It's for anyone that reports their OPEB or pension information. So it's a statewide, anyone that's waiting for those final reports from the controller's office. It's not just CalSavers.
Okay. We can move on.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to alert anybody to that, so.
To improve as well. Any other questions? Thank you so much for your report.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Moving to item number 6, we have an annual review and readoption of the investment policy statement. We will hear from Executive Director Takar, and of course, any questions may be answered from Mr. Malone. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item number 6 is an action item. As by way of background, Government Code requires the board to review its investment policy statement on an annual basis during a public meeting. Staff recently worked with the board's investment consultant, Makita Investment Group, to review the IPS and identify any areas of need of revision in keeping with the routine review cycle. Staff and the consultants identified a few technical changes that would improve the quality, clarity, and accuracy of the IPS and presented those proposed changes to the board at the May 22nd, 2023 board meeting. Now, here's the interesting part. At the meeting, there was a request for staff and the investment consultants to revisit the existing investment belief number 10 on ESG/socially responsible investment, and to work with the controller's office on developing language to encourage the board to evaluate efforts by fund managers to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion principles into their work as part of the selection of future fund managers. That language can be seen on page 9. If you're curious at looking at the former language on ESG and the current proposed version, and then that's investment belief 10, and then investment belief 11 is new and reflects the language that we worked out related to DEI. So staff's recommendation is that the board review and consider approving the revisions to the IPS as proposed in attachment 6A.
Through the chair? You want to go ahead?
You go first.
Just two short things. One, will the record reflect that Makita has reviewed and approved these changes?
They have.
I just want you on the record.
We are on the record.
Okay. And then the second question, why is it on page 11, it says our investment options and benchmarks as of May 2022, sitting here in August 2023. Don't we want these to be as of now?
That appendix could be that was the date that they were changed, and so typically the date doesn't get changed until the options change, but it also would be perfectly reasonable to update that date, given that your full review has taken place.
I'd appreciate it, at least, from my point of view.
Yeah. Support that, Jane. And through the chair, one more question. And this is something that, just is always on my mind, just living in a retirement plan space world, is do we feel like the IPS is bulletproof? If litigation were ever to occur, that's one of the things that oftentimes gets tossed out because it's either too vague or doesn't have enough, detail around very specific items. So I would just love to hear your perspective from that point of view when we're living in the life of Schlichter and, all the other firms joining the bandwagon
Yeah,
as we get bigger.
sure. So my general comment is that it is an area where you want to exert caution. You want to be sure to express the board's beliefs around these issues, but also to acknowledge that there are limitations with respect to what this board or any board can influence in the process of evaluating investments, which is ultimately the task of this board as it relates to Savers. So when I think about DEI, and you'll see some language in here that notes that the program will evaluate firms for their efforts as part of any formal RFP process. So I think that most of us, or all of us sitting around the table, believe that these efforts can and may result in better outcomes. The important thing from my perspective is that what we're doing here is encouraging transparency. The more information we receive from these firms, the better we can all evaluate each of those firms on their merits. And so that is what the belief is designed to reflect, is that an understanding that the more we know, the better decisions we can make, and this is just one of many of the factors that we'll be evaluating in a search process going forward. So I view that as helping express the desire of this board to include DE&I in that process without putting you in a position that could be more complex down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions from the public, either in the room or on the phone or on Zoom, regarding action item 6, readoption of the investment policy statement?
Seeing none at this time.
Move it up.
As amended.
Hold on, wait. But thank you.
Any questions from the board regarding action item number 6? I like that we're trying to see this.
I appreciate that too. I'm not trying to be here all day either, but I do have, I thank you for recognizing me. I just want to, just acknowledge and applaud and express some appreciation to the staff and to the to the treasurer's office for going back, reworking, and really honestly honoring my request that the statement didn't address DEI, and I just think it's important for us to address this omission, to recognize it, the importance of investing through a lens that values diversity, equity, and inclusion. If we're not speaking about it, we're not paying attention to it, then attention won't go there. Attention flows where how does it go? Oh my God, I say it every single day in my morning mantras. Energy flows where attention goes.
Yes.
Energy flows where attention goes, and I fully believe that and embrace it in my own life and the things that I've been able to accomplish when odds were against me. So I'd just like to see similar language in all of the state programs that make it either investments or investment decisions on taxpayer dollars. And Mika, I completely agree with you when it comes to has to do with transparency. That is the driving force. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your support of this item. Thank you.
Thank
You can take a motion now.
Okay. Is there a motion on the item?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Thank you, Ms. Hooper. Mr. Van Voorhis?
I like
roll
you.
call, please.
Laura Cohen.
Aye, thank you.
Ms. Castellan.
Aye.
Ms. Cooper.
Aye.
Hello.
Aye.
Ms. Miller.
Aye.
So forth.
Aye.
And Chair.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. The motion carries and the item is approved.
Thank you.
We will move now to another action item, number 7, the resolution 2023-205, authority to release requests for the proposals of investment consulting services. For this item, the board will consider approving the release of a request for proposals for the investment of consulting services presented by Mr. Descartes, Executive Director. Please present the item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff seeks approval to release a RFP, a request for proposal for investment consultant services. If approved, staff will release the RFP and present the finalists for a resulting contract for the board's consideration at the November board meeting. So some background detail here. At the October of 2020 meeting, the board approved an agreement with Makita Investment Group for investment consultant services. The contract was executed to provide the board with assistance with the program investment belief development, investment policy implementation, expertise on the investment industry, including investment option identification, selection, and ongoing performance monitoring and reporting. The board's existing contract for investment consultant services expires January 9th of 2024, so coming up. As of June 30th, 2023, $302,389 of the maximum of that $365,000 contract had been spent. Staff proposes the issuance of an RFP for investment consultant services with a contracted budget of $320,000 for a 2.5-year, 30-month term, plus an option at the board's discretion to extend for an additional year and add an additional $130,000. Staff recommends that the board approve the resolution upon consideration. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that have a question, whether in the room or on the phone or on Zoom? Please raise your hand or press star 9.
Seeing none at this time.
Questions from the board?
Through the chair, I would offer myself to a subcommittee. I just wanted to make that statement as we review this.
Any other questions or comments from the board regarding this action item number 7?
Move to adopt.
Second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cohen?
Aye.
Ms. Gastel?
Aye.
Ms. Hooper?
Aye.
Or Mr. Lowe?
Aye.
Or Ms. Miller?
Aye.
Or Mr. Sokol?
Aye.
And for the chair.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
The motion carries and the item is approved. So we'll move forward to the last item, of course, which is public comment. This concludes our agenda. Is there any other comments or questions from the public, either in the room or on the phone or on Zoom?
Yes, thanks to the chair for running such an efficient,
Yes.
prompt.
Yay.
Much appreciated.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes.
No public comments at this time.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.